Okay, so I am going to read a book. The book is called The Initiate, Some Impressions of a Great Soul, and it is by Cyril Scott. Now, I'm not a professional reader. Um, I read to my kids and I read growing up. We read to each other, but it's going to have all of the little mix-ups and rereading a word or so. It'll be more like somebody is reading to you in real life, in a living room or in front of the fireplace or wherever you like to read. So here we go. Introductory on initiates, adepts, and masters. The story, if so it can be called, of Justin Morward Hague is a true one, insofar that such a person does exist, although, as explained later, I have been compelled for many reasons to conceal his identity. And I emphasize the fact of his existence because there are a number of people who may doubt the possibility of attaining to that degree of perfection which he indubitably manifested, thus crediting me with writing romance instead of fact. And yet he does not by any means stand alone at his stage of spiritual evolution. For not only are there many more like him living amongst us at the present time, but if world history is to be accredited with truth, there have been hundreds as great as, and greater than he in the past. True, it is that the so-called enlightenment of our 20th century civilization seeks to negate or explain away the unusual powers of these men. But deeper thinkers who have taken the trouble to penetrate behind the veil of superficial knowledge are coming to the conclusion that the old truism, where there is smoke, there must also be fire, is applicable to the case in point, and that this negation and explaining away on the part of so-called civilization is not the result of real knowledge, but of ignorance instead. Nor must we leave aside the contributions which romance from the most ancient of times has afforded in this connection, dating from before the period of Kalidasa to the latest works of fiction published in the present year. We have novels, stories, dramas dealing with mysterious and marvelous beings so far above the ordinary man in the street almost, as a human soul is above an animal. Indeed, seeing this is so, are we not forced to ask the pertinent question whether the imagination of creative genius has not somewhere its foundation in truth? Can all these poets, dramatists, and writers really be weaving the fanciful web of mere fable and nothing beyond? For if so, why do they still persist in the face of scientific ridicule, and thus continue to fill the public mind with falsehood and unsubstantiality? And the answer to this question is, consciously or unconsciously, they are stating the truth, and their subjective mind is aware of facts, for these facts which their objective mind is ignorant of. For these adepts, sages, and masters do exist, and he who knows how to search can find them and become convinced of their reality once and for all. Now, although I have inferred that romance is correct as far as the fundamentals are concerned, yet as a matter of truth it is very often incorrect in its details, or at any rate very misleading, in that it blends allegory with fact without notifying the dividing line between the one and the other. And to begin with, these great adepts of spiritual science are not quite as mysterious as writers of fiction and even supposed fact would have us believe. Although I am aware that two such masters, or Mahatmas, as they are often called, reside in the far distant vastness of Tibet. Yet to suppose they all follow this example is to suppose a fallacy. For I know there are several such masters living in England at the present moment, as well as in America, and in almost all countries of the world. Nor do they remain in one locality, but often travel from place to place as any ordinary mortal might. Being to all outward appearance perfectly human, nay, perfectly normal, they may not cruise about the world in a marvelous yacht, as Marie Corelli would have us believe, if that be her object, nor are they the morally dried up mummies, which Bulwer Lytton depicts in his prototype memoir, to be found in Zanoni, his occult novel. Lytton depicts in his prototype memoir, to be found in Zanoni, his occult novel. But as romance permits itself, and quite naturally the indulgence of romancing, we must not expect accuracy from its writers any more than we must expect it from impressionist painters. I have said that to all outward appearance, these adepts are perfectly normal. They are perfectly human. But it is to outward appearance only, and not to the deeper knowledge which accrues as the result of a closer relationship with them, and their minds and faculties. To the casual acquaintance, apart from an appearance of unusual health, calm, dignity, and force, there is nothing which might awaken the suspicion that they possessed powers of whose existence he was entirely unaware. Dressing neither in strange garments, nor living in ghost-haunted castles, these men, far from wishing to awaken the curiosity or admiration of their fellows, seek to render themselves as ordinary to the casual observer as they possibly can. Many of them even affect some harmless vice of their fellows, such as smoking, for instance, in order the more to normalize themselves in the eyes of the world. But this is indeed only to the world. For those who come to them seeking with the necessary qualifications occult wisdom at their hands obtain a very different impression, an insight into their marvelous personalities, which to any other is sedulously denied. And it is absolutely essential that in order to find, we must know how to seek. Only to him who follows the requisite of this maxim is it possible to discover the truth. And that truth is the very quintessence of real romance. In other words, the outer world, not knowing for what to search, finds nothing, or at best, very little. So that for any portrayal of an adept or initiate, we must of necessity turn to the student or disciple, and to him alone. For through his thirst for occult wisdom, he has earned the right to know the masters as they really are in all their divine possibility. Let us then try to imagine a human being devoid of the weaknesses and drawbacks of the ordinary person, a being who is utterly beyond the feelings of selfishness, vanity, jealousy, anger, hatred, and other vices of a kindred nature. Moreover, a being who possesses a consciousness so intense, so infinitely alive as to warrant the expression superconsciousness rather than life. And this superconsciousness of necessity embraces a continual sensation of unconditional bliss and unconditional love, conjoined with which is a supreme wisdom and power. As to the latter, the adept, possessing knowledge of nature and its laws as yet not disclosed to humanity at large, is able to control natural forces in a way which the ignorant cannot even imagine, let alone follow. Indeed, were he to exhibit the manipulation of those forces to the uninitiated, which, however, he never would do, they, in their utter incredulity and ignorance, would ascribe the whole exhibition to trickery, and pronounce him at best a conjurer, if not a fraud. In a word, show people what they cannot understand, and immediately they will ascribe it to something they can understand, for that is ever the tendency of the ignorant. We have thus attempted a description of the inner man, and now to deal with the outer aspect, the more visible side of the adept. And to begin with, he manifests perpetual health, and in many cases perpetual youth, or, better said, the prime of manhood. Electing to work unceasingly for the good of humanity and find an aged body a hindrance to this, he brings his occult knowledge to bear on the molecules of his physical body and so prevents the change known as age, finally dying when he chooses to die and not before. Nor must we omit another point connected with his youthfulness and perfect health, namely the fact of his entire freedom from worry, and his entire immunity from all those jarring emotions which so tend to age the body and upset the bodily equilibrium. Possessing in his mind an eternal peace, The frets and troubles of life seem to him childish and insignificant as the troubles of infancy to the grown-up man. And yet, being possessed of perfect love, he can sympathize with others as a mother loves and sympathizes with her child. And the very frets she knows it will one day outgrow. Indeed, as sympathy to be intrinsically valuable must be untainted with fear. For otherwise it were impotent truly to aid and console. I'm going to read that sentence again. Indeed, as sympathy to be intrinsically valuable must be untainted with fear. For otherwise it were impotent truly to aid and console. So is the fearless sympathy of a master the most valuable and help-bringing it were possible to conceive. And at the back of this utter fearlessness is knowledge. That knowledge which must ever exist as the only true basis of solace, the balm wherewith to soothe the bleeding hearts of nascent suffering humanity. I have attempted this lame description of the adept in order that my reader may the more easily understand the truthfulness of this book, and not credit me with adding to the large proportion of romance on the subject, for verily, in my opinion, truth is more romantic than fiction, whether it be stranger or not. Indeed, should I, in the following pages, succeed in depicting 1/4 of the essence of romance emanating from the magnetism of the personality of my teacher, then I shall not entirely have failed, which is all I can hope for in so difficult a task. I have, in fact, much to contend with, for the simple reason I am not permitted those scenic and ceremonial appurtenances which fiction draws to its end. An adept or high initiate is so different in respect of greatness to the ordinary great man, so chary of fame and all its glamour, that to know him in the spirit and flesh is really the only way to know him at all. Being devoid of vanity, and thus importuned by any form of curiosity on the part of the public, he seeks in every way to draw attention from himself instead of the reverse. And thus, if he lives apart from the world, it is to hide himself in solitude, and if he lives amidst the world, it is to hide himself among the crowd.